Dude, too much going on right now. I just need one day of no Philly sports drama. That's what this show is supposed to be, dude.
I was so hyped to get on to
This was a Daily Dose mega show, hour and a half long. We got a Sixers Heat intense, fun, emotional win last night in overtime with that Joel Embiid and Danny Green performance, 9 threes, tied a franchise record. We were going to break that down for you guys. We have a guy from ESPN, Paul Hembekides. Hembo is coming on the show.
The Brooklyn Nets have acquired Houston's James Harden. Tweeted by Woj.
Wow. Wow, the drama is over. Gint couldn't be happier. He couldn't be happier. Now here comes.
now we're not winning this year. That's for
Oh shit!
All right, trade Ben for Bradley Beal.
Shut up, yo. Oh my God. See, I'm relieved.
But how does Ben want to play here now? Tell me that.
Well, you have to understand. There were rumors about it before, and Daryl Morey debunked those. That's what I said to you before the show started. It seemed all well and good. How do you know that wasn't Brooklyn leaking shit to get leverage? No one knows behind the scenes.
Mark Stein tweeted it.
You don't know where he got it from?
Okay, yeah, maybe.
James Harden to the Nets. So now I'm relieved.
Details. I'll keep you updated on the details, but I have nothing detail-wise.
You guys keep me. We got a lot of comments here, especially from our guys at TPL. Dibe says, oh, snap. Justin Persichetti. James Harden to Brooklyn from Shams and Woj.
Dude, this thing's going to be like 17. Yeah, that's Tim Ollie, one of my good friends. He's a Heat fan. He's a Heat, Steelers, Notre Dame, North Carolina. He's all over the country.
Tim, you're the worst. You're the worst. I don't even know you. Do you guys think Kyrie is involved? I have no idea. I would assume so.
He has to be.
I would assume so. However, I don't know why Houston would want to trade one cancer and acquire another cancer. But
that's the only thing. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do you think Brooklyn would move Karis LeVert before Kyrie? I doubt it, right?
Dude, I don't know.
What's going on, dude? Like, this is like – oh, yeah, and he's a Yankees fan. I forgot to mention that.
Hold on, I got to get this out for a second. I'm sorry, guys. I'm right here. So you laughed at – you mentioned it, dude. That's the issue, right? So how do we beat the Nets? See, that's the point. That is the point. Okay, fair. Ben guards KD. Who's guarding James Harden?
Any Green.
Look, man, I'm relieved. I'm just as relieved as you are. I really didn't want it to happen. However, we knew what the alternative was. It was us or the Nets. And now that it happened for the Nets, I need to know this package, dude, because it better be. Listen, I know they probably had to give up a ton of picks and pick swaps. It better be like 4 dudes off their current roster, because if it's not, good luck winning the East this year, bro.
If Kyrie or LeVert aren't involved, it better be 97 draft picks until 2091.
You're not listening to me, though.
No,
if they had to give up most of their bench and you know what I mean, and a starter or two, and now it's the KD and James Harden show with a couple, with some role players around them, I'm not horrified. It's scary as shit. I'm not horrified. But if it's KD, James Harden, they kept LeVert, they still have Jarrett, like they still have some core pieces.
Here we go. You ready?
Rate it.
4 first-round picks, 4 draft swaps, Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen. So, dude, they have Kyrie Irving and James Harden in the same locker room.
That's very true. That is very true, dude.
So, yeah, we talked about with the Nets when they were winning all those games at the beginning of the year that everything was going great, and then you start seeing some losses and the fingers start getting pointed around. Well, tell me how there's enough basketball for Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. They better play with 6 basketballs in that court.
I don't know if Kyrie's going to play another game for the Nets.
Well, Steve A wants him to retire.
Yeah, I saw that. First of all, we're going to get to the game soon, guys. I promise. So much is going on right now. Yeah, Abe says LeVert, Allen, and pick swaps. Harden to Brooklyn from Amadeo.
Go Flyers.
And it's sad to see how this fan base has turned on Ben. I agree, man. I didn't really want it to happen.
Deal with
what?
It's a three-way deal with Cleveland. Karis LeVert, Dante Exum, some dude I can't pronounce, 4 first-round picks, including the Cavs 2022 pick, 4 pick swaps to the Rockets, and then Jarrett Allen and Taurean Prince are heading to the Cavs. So the Nets lose LeVert, Allen, and Taurean Prince. They gave up a lot, but they got a lot.
That's the alternative, man.
Tucker too?
What?
No, they didn't get Tucker. That would have been bad.
That's the alternative, though. Now that's the reality we have to live in, right? We didn't want to give up Ben. Well, now you got to go through Brooklyn with those at minimum 2. If Kyrie's, going to be a train wreck there.
Blowing up, man.
But if it's Kyrie, Harden, and KD,
Oh, dude. LeVert's going to – dude, Houston's become my favorite team in the West, bro.
I thought you were going to say favorite team. I was going to be like,
they got John Wall, Karis LeVert, Christian Wood, Boogie. Like, they're my boys down there now. Oh, man. Well, that was a bomb.
You said ready for it, and I was like, oh, God, here it comes. Wow. I got to hold on. I got to regroup, dude. I don't even know.
Yeah, we had like this whole thing planned out, and like now it's like
it's all gone. So yeah. I gotta regroup here. Going through it. Is that that's a lot to give up if you're the Nets?
The Nets, just the definition. There's nothing more than all in I've ever seen in my life. Like they lost all. So the thing we talked about was depth with them. Like that's why we thought, especially the back-to-back night, I was like, they come in waves. Like they have multiple guys. But they just lost their best 3 players off the bench when Jarrett Allen was on the bench. So now they start Kyrie, James Harden, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah.
Spencer Dinwiddie's off the
bench. Shamet, TLC. Who else?
I'll look at their roster. Hold on.
Before we move on, because we'll have about 10 minutes before Hembo hops on with us to talk a little bit about this trade, what it means for the Sixers moving forward.
Johnson, Jeff Green, Bruce Brown. So, I mean, they still have some pieces, but you lost all depth. But you got,
I don't know, dude.
You got 44 and 17.
Yeah.
So.
And, this is it, right? Is Kyrie done in what, dude? Because no one knows about that. That's a mystery right now.
Well, yeah, you saw the reports today. It said he didn't want Steve Nash as head coach, and he was really mad. He had no say in that.
He doesn't have a relationship with KD.
I have a horrible relationship.
Yeah.
So, what do they shop him and get more depth?
Hold on. N. Mizzle says their second unit is bad. I don't want Harden Philly. Well, you don't have to worry about that, my friend. He's with Brooklyn now. Tim says they just got kind of old. They got rid of all young guys. This is a 2 to 3 year team.
Yeah, this is like when they
hope to win in those years.
$80, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Victor Oladipo just got traded?
Dude, what?
I don't know if Nick's messing around. Yeah, Victor Oladipo just got traded to the Rockets.
For Karis LeVert.
What? Dude, Karis LeVert's a better basketball player than Victor Oladipo. The Pacers just got better.
Okay. Well, again, we have about 10 minutes before Hembo comes on. So we will be coming back to the James Harden, the Brooklyn Nets trade, what it means for the Philadelphia 76ers going forward this season and years to come. But then let's talk a little bit about this game last night. 137-134 win in overtime over the Miami Heat. Both teams battling COVID issues and injuries all around. And Joel Embiid.
Tell him, Dives.
Oh, sorry. Went past it. Dives, call me crazy, but give me real spacing and chemistry and depth with Ben and Joel all day long. Get him, Dives. Get him. This is what he says. There is only one basketball. It's scary. Don't get me wrong. It is scary. But it would have been the same thing with the Sixers. You have to see how it plays out. Right?
Dude, this feels like trade deadline day.
I know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with everything you said, dude.
All right, so let's get into the game, right? So,
yeah.
Embiid goes off for, sorry, I have a stat line right here. He gives you 45, 16, 4 assists, a career-high 5 steals, and a block. Game. He was unconscious in the third quarter, going for 20 points, 8 of 8 from the field in the third quarter. The offense as a whole kind of tailed off to start in the middle of the fourth quarter. And then he just put the team on his back late in the fourth quarter and the entire overtime period. He was 11 of 11 from the free throw line in this game, 16 of 23 from the field. Clutch shot after clutch block down the stretch of this game. Joel Embiid is in MVP form.
Yeah.
And he literally willed this team to a victory last night. I don't care who he had out on the floor. I don't care who the Sixers had out on the floor. It was a huge win. It would have been a bad loss turned into a huge win. Mark says Sixers win was a blue-collar Philly sports win, gritty and hard-fought. I absolutely agree. The moment it swung from what, like I just said, would have been a terrible loss to what the Heat had to put out there to a huge win coming back. And there were so many emotional swings and momentum swings. Like the Sixers were up by 12 with 6 minutes left. They were up by 9 with 5 minutes left. Whatever the case is, the Heat come back. Miami comes storming back. No one can guard Tyler Hero down the stretch. They're up 5 with, I believe, like 42, 45 seconds left. Isaiah Joe hits a humongous 3 after I just was dogging him the last couple shows. Hits a huge 3. He was good again last night. They inbound the ball. Danny Green strips Tyler Hero from behind. We get the ball back, and Joel Embiid sinks a pull-up jumper with like 2 or 3 seconds left in regulation. Sends it to overtime. Gets like 3 or 4 straight possessions where he gets buckets, whether it's drawing contact and finishing for an N1 and sinking the free throw, whether it's a pull-up jumper over 2 guys from the mid-range. He was Euro stepping his way down the lane last night. Again, he was dominant. Danny Green, 29 points, ties a franchise record for 9 made 3-point attempts last night. But not just take that aside, Gint. He had 2 huge offensive rebounds and a kickouts to the shooters last night for Dakota Mathias and Isaiah Joe to hit 3s last night down the stretch. And he had the steal on Tyler Hero, as I stated earlier, plucking him from behind to bring us back in this game. The young kids, Tyrese Maxey, Dakota Mathias, Isaiah Joe, all hit a huge clutch shot, huge 3 down the stretch of last night's game. Last night was emotional, intense, fun, and during this whole COVID stretch for both teams, the NBA saw this game on the schedule again on Thursday and said, no, we're not putting this product on national television. Take it off of TNT, and they give you a fun-ass basketball game last night.
Yeah. Just a side note also, because yesterday we obviously recapped the Hawks game, and we talked about how abysmal Danny Green was, right?
Yeah.
0 for 9 from the field, and then I said, I would love to see what happens tonight with Ben being back on the floor and Danny Green, and he magically hits 9 threes. And I'm not sitting here saying that's all Ben Simmons, don't get me wrong, but it's amazing what he can do on the court and make jobs a lot easier for the guys around him, which is what he did when we were at full strength and we won 7 games in a row and we were 7-0. But just to get into more detail with Joel that was one of the best.
Oh, right here on the Daily Dose, we're starting the Joel for MVP train. It starts right now.
Joel was literally every bit of a top 5 basketball player in the entire league last night. And again, regardless of who he was playing, there was no stopping him. So, I mean, we won. It's awesome. I just can't believe what came about the next day, that we almost shipped off a 24-year-old star because he had a bad game and didn't shoot the ball. Not even that he missed shots, he just didn't shoot it. So,
all right. So I just sent Hembo the link. So when he pops in, Paul Hembekides, producer for ESPN's Get Up morning show, will be joining us soon to talk everything James Harden to the Nets, what it means for the Sixers, maybe a little bit of last night's game, and if we have time, most of my questions lined up for Hembo were Eagles related. I know no one really wants to hear about them, especially now. So that only comes with if we have time now. Obviously, this trade and the Sixers get pushed to center floor. But yeah, I agree. Yeah,
he's saying Nadir, he ain't going anywhere.
He ain't leaving. He is not leaving. And that's something I want to ask Kembo. Like, how true was it about these packages? Does he think? Obviously, he might not. He's not going to know. But how true? Because was it Brooklyn just trying to get leverage? We got to ask him what he thinks of the trade. Did they give up too much or too little? Is Houston ready? And here he is. Let's see if I can get him in here. Hembo, what's going on, man? Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. It's good to see you.
How's it going, man? All right. So, yeah, I messaged you a little bit earlier and said, well, change of plans probably. And now, as we were doing the show live, really a change of plans. So just give me your overall thoughts on the trade. Cleveland somehow got sprinkled into it. What do you think from the Nets' point of view? Was it too much? Did they win the trade? What do you think?
So I have to admit that my first reaction as a fan of the 76ers was to breathe a massive sigh of relief. You might recall that when you and I spoke a few weeks ago, I was very much out on the notion of trading Ben Simmons for James Harden. And while I would have entertained the idea of moving Embiid for him, it became clear over the last few weeks to me that the risk here just did not outweigh the reward, especially when you consider how well the 76ers started their season before COVID took over, of course. So, like, my initial reaction was, thank God this wasn't us, because as talented as James Harden is, and as much as, adding him to this team while subtracting Simmons may have rendered them the favorite to win the East both this year and next, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And that was far from a certainty, right? That was far from a guarantee. So I think there's a chance. I'm not speaking with any sort of insider knowledge here. I think there's a chance that in the coming days or coming weeks, we may come to find out that the 76ers really weren't all that interested in pursuing this full bore, and that Daryl Morey may have been using his clout and his experience and in relationships with the Rockets to drive up the price for a player that he may not have wanted. And look, he said on the record that Simmons and Embiid weren't going anywhere, and at least as we stand today, he wasn't lying to us.
Yeah, that's something real quick, and that's just something I was going to say to you was not that you would no, but how much of this was maybe Morey, like you said, or even Brooklyn, using that as as leverage. You know what I'm saying? Because it was put out weeks ago that we were going to trade Simmons. Morey comes out. They're not going anywhere. I want at least a year of Joel and Ben together. So.
Yeah, so from the Nets' point of view, it makes a good bit of sense. I mean, we know what their intentions are. This team is building in a way that the 76ers are not. And Kyrie Irving's curious behavior, shall we call it, over the last few weeks sort of exacerbates their need to add something now. And they were interested in doing this anyway. Like, I'm not sure how reliable a player he is moving forward for them. So there's a good chance that the last couple weeks of his acting this way and behaving sort of in this peculiar manner did sort of drive the front office there to make this move. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Look, I could be wrong, and the 76ers could have been all in on the player. But what common sense tells me is that Daryl Morey got out of there at that time for a certain reason. And we know, based on all of our reporting at ESPN, that James Harden really was, held that franchise hostage for the better part of the last 10 years. He wasn't just a superstar player. He was very impactful in player procurement. I mean, he wanted Chris Paul, then he wanted him gone. He wanted Russell Westbrook, then he wanted him gone. And then the idea of sort of rendering your program sort of his, especially without any goodwill have built up in the city, and also when you consider how bad a shape he's in now, frankly, it was just not something I was ready to stomach. And look, Daryl Morey has more data, both about his personality and his game, than any other person in the world. So the fact that the 76ers did not make this trade leads me to believe that it was the right thing to do, because no one is more qualified to make that decision than he is.
Yeah, because Mark Stein reported that the Sixers were doing everything they can to kind of get assets besides Tyrese Maxey. And that's kind of what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, do you think that really could have been the line? Because if you're going to move Ben Simmons, you're going all in on this season. So and to me, that was kind of weird that they would stop at a 20-year-old player. That how much time is he going to get in coming into this postseason?
So it could be one of two things. It could be that reporting was 100% what the Sixers mindset was, and that maybe Tyrese Maxey's performance earlier this season, which at least in certain games has looked awfully promising, especially in relation to where they drafted him, sort of made him a prized asset in their minds, and they said, we can't trade this guy, despite his career being so young and so short so far. The other thing too is this could be like all the other things, just media manipulation. That isn't to say that the report wasn't true, but it is to say that is absolutely what the 76ers wanted Mark Stein to report. That look, like this is just how these things go. A lot of these things now play out in the media over Twitter. Like, how many times do we feel like we're watching these negotiations happen? Like, we're not in the rooms, yet we're seeing all the information. Like these general managers are using reporters the way that they want to, and the reporters are eager to share it with us. But it's really hard to know the truth with any certainty. Mark's an outstanding reporter, and he could be exactly right, and that could absolutely have been the breaking point for the 76ers. But my inclination is to believe that they were not nearly as serious as trading for James Harden as we've been led to believe. Just a guess.
Before I get to my next Sixers question, I want to keep it with the Nets for a second. You brought up Kyrie earlier. How much of this, do you think that now Brooklyn, even from a Sixers point of view, Brooklyn has a big three and it's scary? Or like I said earlier to Gint, maybe Kyrie is done in Brooklyn. He's kind of gone off the reserve, dude. And now the report came out today that he's pissed off because he didn't have say in the coaching hire and didn't want Steve Nash. He doesn't have a relationship with Kevin Durant. He just kind of didn't show up and hasn't been back. And now the COVID issues with him and losing game checks did Brooklyn acquire this for a big three, or did Brooklyn acquire this because James Harden is going to replace Kyrie Irving, kind of? I
think it's at least in part a hedge. This is very abnormal behavior we're seeing from Kyrie Irving. I think in an ideal world, they're thinking about putting the three of them together and seeing how many points they can score. I mean, that's obviously the intention, but right now he's sort of a wild card. And if you listen to Steve Nash talk yesterday, and you read the statement that Sean Marks put out yesterday too, this program definitely doesn't have their arms wrapped around him at the moment. That's clear and obvious. They're not making any bones about it either. So it's very I actually view this from the perspective of the 76ers as somewhat advantageous, because even if it does work on the floor to some degree, you're still looking at a team that won't be able to play a look of defense, and you're also looking at a team that is at any point minutes away from spontaneously combusting due to the personalities. Obviously, James Harden hadn't gotten there yet, and Kyrie Irving's already not showing up for work, right? It's very bizarre. So it's very difficult to say if the Nets were operating from a position of strength from that standpoint, or if the James Harden trade was in part to hedge for the possibility that Kyrie Irving doesn't play for them again, or the season, or in the near future. I was somewhat surprised, to be honest, that he wasn't a part of the trade. There's no clause in his contract, and we've talked about that being a possibility in the past. So in some sense, I was a little bit surprised that he wasn't being shipped off. That could have been because the Rockets didn't want him, for all we know.
Yeah, that's what I had said a few minutes ago. I was surprised, but why would Houston trade one cancer in their locker room just to acquire another? But let's look at this from a Sixers point of view for a second, right? Because when you first made your opening statement today, you are on the side of what me and Gint were on. The fact that, the Sixers team, even though it's a small sample size, when they're fully healthy, put aside it's only 12 games, they're 8-4. When they're fully healthy and they're starting 5 plays, they're 7-0. So how much of this trade, are you looking at this now Brooklyn's a powerhouse, Kyrie or not? Just KD and James Harden. Are they a powerhouse in the Sixers this year? Take a back seat. We'll have to hope for next year or 2 years from now. Or are you looking at this as the Sixers, with this spacing, with their defense, with the 3-point shooting, can they still beat Brooklyn in a 7-game series?
The Sixers, I would give at least a coin flip chance to beat Brooklyn in a 7-game series. We have to see what that looks like for Brooklyn before we're certain that it works. I mean, these are 3 very similar players without much interest in playing defense. So that's going to be a big part of this equation for my money. And the 76ers have shown that this is a top 5 defensive team and will likely be that's a good identity to have. That's a good place to start. The question obviously is, what kind of efficiency can the 76ers play offense with? And right now, that's about league average, and I would suspect as guys get healthy and more acclimated, that will improve. But right now, the combination of Harris and Embiid and Simmons and Curry on the floor, that quartet has generated the highest plus-minus of any quartet in the NBA this season. Obviously, health-dependent and all that stuff. But in the 172 minutes, 76ers are outscoring their opponents almost by half a point per possession. Remarkably efficient. So again, I think that's the early success, like you mentioned, in terms of the spacing and what have you, has gone a long way into making the 76ers front office and in some sense the fan base feel better about what we have right now, because as we entered the season, there were a lot of us that were arguing in favor of trading for James Harden. It hasn't taken all that much data to convince us otherwise. 12 games and not even a full 12 games. You mentioned there's only 7 games in which this team's really been at full strength. That's enough data to tell us let's not overreact to this and totally, flip our program on its head just because James Harden is available. I think the 76ers did the right thing here, and I'm optimistic that they'll get the offense right enough that they'll be super dangerous in the playoffs.
Let me ask you this too. I mean, the Nets gave up every type of depth they had, essentially. Garrett gone, Jared Allen gone, Taurean Prince gone, which, in my opinion, playing them in a 7-game series put us at a major disadvantage. Do you see that now we have that advantage in terms of depth? Because our bench is there. Shake Milton obviously has been productive. Tyrese Maxey looked well. Dwight Howard's just a solid piece to come in. But do you think that could be a big disadvantage for Brooklyn?
Yes. The depth is an important piece of it, but trading Jared Allen removes by far their best rim protector. DeAndre Jordan is nowhere close to him at this point in his career at that skill. It's going to be difficult to win a 7-game series against a good team without being able to play like a defense. And not only that, there's not that much interest in playing defense among those players. I'm guessing the communication is going to take a while to get that right. And obviously you're going to have to stagger your minutes in some ways, and you're going to have to get James Harden's conditioning up to a point where that's satisfactory. I mean, there's a real chance that the Nets are even better next year than they will be this year, but the Sixers are operating from an advantage because now they're the team theoretically in the series that we're creating a hypothetical for that has more experience and more continuity, right? At least they had a bit of an offseason to get together. The Brooklyn Nets are sort of throwing this thing together as they go. I'm less if I were a fan of that team, I'd be a little less concerned about depth. You can find guys at the trade market, around the deadline who might be able to provide you some somewhat meaningful minutes. You can't find impact rim protectors and 3-and-D guys that can impact games in that way at a high level in the playoffs. So that's what would concern me most as a Nets fan, is that they're just not going to be able to stop anybody. So then you're relying on such an extraordinary level of offensive efficiency in order to win games in the playoffs. It might work for a series, maybe 2, but not beyond that. Yeah,
let me ask you something about, COVID hitting the Sixers locker room, because I don't know if you know anything about it or not, but one thing that I noticed is the fact that when Tatum and when it hit Boston and Tatum, the tweet was put out 10 to 14 day quarantine, a couple other guys 10 to 14 day quarantine, that was never listed for Tobias Harris and Shake Milton, at least not that I've seen. Maybe I missed something. So do you have any idea when they could be back? There's rumors that it could be back after the Heat game due to COVID. Do you know anything about that or no?
I can't help you at all with timeline. But what I can tell you is that the NBA, you may have seen just yesterday, is sort of redistributing a more vociferous policy here, because it's very clear that what the NBA is doing is not working. The success in the bubble was so extraordinary that people sort of decided this is the one league that got it right? Well, as it turns out, it's not that easy when you're doing this much travel. And the NBA put its schedule in place the way they did to try to curb some of those travel issues. But you're dealing with a lot more people now, because obviously there was a bunch of teams that weren't in the bubble, and you're dealing with traveling teams all over the country during a time in which we're spiking all over the country, right? Baseball dealt with this early in their season too, and it took them a while to wrap their arms around it. So the 76ers are not going to be anywhere close to the only team that's dealing with this at a significant level. And I'd be willing to bet you that this impacts almost everybody. I'm just hoping that the league doesn't have to suspend its season, for lack of a better term, because so many teams are impacted by it.
Again, let's go with the Sixers. And again, so now – worst comes to the worst, you are playing Kyrie, James Harden, Kevin Durant, 3 offensive guys that could at any point score 40 in a night. Do you think there's any moves to be made on our end to maybe, whether it's another wing defender or try to get another guy that can maybe get you 20 in a game or something of that? What move do you think needs to be made to maybe match up with them a little bit better?
So there are 2 ways you can go. Obviously, Bradley Beal is a pipe dream, right? If you can find a way to swing that, all of a sudden, a lot of your offensive issues are remedied, and you go in as the prohibitive favorite to win the Eastern Conference, for my money. That's one way you can go. It's very unlikely to be able to pull that off. Although, who knows? Maybe at the trade deadline, Washington is not in a position to win now, and they're already looking to dump salary. Who knows? The other way to go, like you said, is to load up as best you can on 3-and-D types to go head-to-head against teams like the Celtics, who have two great wings, of course, and the Nets in a playoff series. Obviously, Giannis is a different animal, and they have Ben Simmons who can help in some degree with that. But what Daryl Morey has shown throughout his career, time and time again, is an ability to find value at the deadline. So the 76ers team that you're watching right now isn't going to be all that close to what you're going to watch in March or April. And that's because Daryl Morey is as good learning on his feet as any general manager in the league. Like, he has taken some Rockets teams from being somewhat average throughout the season, finding pieces at the deadline and becoming much better. And at that time of the year, there's teams that are looking to dump salary, teams that have decided that they're not going to go for it. And the 76ers might be in a position to do so. What I would favor are those kind of 3-and-D types. Anybody who can help you stretch the floor, because obviously Ben Simmons is probably the best kickout player in the NBA at his position, and guys that you can feel comfortable defending multiple positions on the wing, maybe even some ball handlers. I don't have any names off the top of my head, my bad on that, but I do think those are the two options. You try to get the star that can score, or you try to collect some 3-and-D guys who can help you defend across the board, like the Jay Crowder types who was so successful in Miami last season. Yeah,
it's almost like Mikal Bridges would help out a lot, right? Yeah,
it's funny you should mention it.
Yeah, so Hembo, we didn't get to talk. We didn't get to see the Sixers in action since we spoke last. So again, small sample size, and we've spent most of this time talking about the Nets and the Harden deal, rightfully so. However, how do the Sixers match up in the East versus the other teams, the Bucks, the Heat, the Celtics of the East? Where do you see their ceiling as is right now?
If the 76ers don't improve considerably on offense, I don't see a clear path for them to win the East. Milwaukee's always going to be this regular season juggernaut because they have Giannis, but I'm actually somewhat confident in the 76ers to be able to harness him somewhat in the playoffs the way that teams have the last couple of years. I mean, I think Ben Simmons has proven when they played in the regular season that he does a pretty good job in that role. And I'm somewhat confident in the 76ers to be able to match up well against those guys. The Celtics are a tough putt because not only is Jason Tatum a legitimate star, but Jaylen Brown's come on this year. He might be the most improved offensive player in the NBA. Correct me if I'm wrong. There might be another guy or two that comes to mind, but he's up there. And having two wing scorers like that is such a valuable asset. So, I mean, the 76ers are going to have an identity, and they're going to have to be able to really defend people. But that would be the team I would say that I'm somewhat worried about. We know that we have some demons with the Heat. I'm just not sure if the Heat can come anywhere close to duplicating that right now. So I would say where it currently stands, the team that would give me the most concern as a fan of this team would be Boston. Because, I mean, right now Boston has two players that can get theirs, and the Sixers don't have one that can get theirs anywhere close to that level. And you trust both of those guys to take the shots for you late and close in games. And right now that player for the 76ers is probably Tobias Harris. And, he's third on that list for me if you're ranking them 1, 2, 3, for sure.
Yeah, so we have a comment here for you. At Hembo is a Sixers PR crisis manager for Sixers fans. I'm not going to lie to you, man. Before you came on, I think a lot of people were freaking out about this juggernaut. I mean, I think in some people's minds there was a juggernaut being built in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I could be proven wrong. My issues with Brooklyn, like I said, are the fact that I think they're not going to be able to play defense at a high level at all. And not so much that it's going to be a major liability. I feel comfortable saying that. You mentioned the depth, and that's an outstanding point to make. The other thing too is, like, in the NBA, chemistry is a fickle thing, and it's a hard thing to create. It's a very easy thing to tear down. I'm not sure that these guys are going to be able to buy in the way they need to. Like, if Kyrie Irving was on board right now and 100% in and invested in that team, I might feel a little bit differently. If James Harden wasn't going nuclear for the last couple of weeks to try to expel himself from the Rockets, I might feel a little bit differently. But there's so much that you have to sort of bottle up here that I'm not confident in them being able to do that. You couple that with the fact that you have a first-year head coach and a general manager and a front office that can't quite get their arms around this Kyrie situation. There's a lot of variables here, right? The Sixers have some constants that right? You know that you have a veteran coach that should get close to as much out of his team as possible. You have two young stars in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and you know what you're getting from those guys, right? You know that Harris is playing at a really high level. You know Steph Curry's going to make half his threes on kickouts, right? There's a bunch of things that you know. All I know is about the Nets is they can play ISO ball better than any team that's ever lived, right? But no team has ever won an NBA title with that as their primary offense. The closest we got was the Cavaliers the year in which LeBron and Kyrie teamed up. But LeBron at that point in his career was leaps and bounds better than anybody that they have right now, just as a two-way player, to be totally honest. So sure, like the Nets are collecting talent in a way that the 76ers have not. But if you look at the last several seasons, like, it's not always been the most talented team that's gotten there. The chemistry piece has mattered a lot. I mean, the Toronto Raptors won the NBA Finals a couple years ago, and they weren't close to the most talented team in the conference, in my judgment. So I wouldn't sweat. If the Nets put this thing together, it will be because of an outstanding coaching job, and it will have been something that Steve Nash has literally never done before.
I'm trying to figure out. So let me ask you this. This is a weird question because it's not really related to the Sixers at all, but do you think Brooklyn would almost be better if Kyrie just completely disassociated himself at all, or tried to hang on? Because he literally came out today and said Steve Nash wasn't the guy he wanted. He didn't have a choice. Yeah. So, like, at this point, like, they might as well just cut ties if they can.
I think that the combination of James Harden and Kevin Durant is a better combination than James Harden, Kevin Durant, and some approximation of 50% of Kyrie Irving, right? Like, if Kyrie, like I said, you have to be invested and you have to be in, especially in a new structure, especially in somewhat of a rebuild here. And he's absolutely not. Like, it's one thing to have strife internally without us knowing. Like, this is being played out publicly like some semblance of a soap opera. It's very bizarre. So yeah, if Kyrie Irving decided to sort of ostracize himself, or the Nets chose to do that to him, I have no doubts that the Nets would definitely be a more cohesive group. I mean, the best case scenario here is one in which Kyrie Irving accepts his role as sort of a distributing point guard who gets his when he can off the dribble. But like, in order to get to that point, there are so many things that seemingly need to happen between now and then that I'm not counting on. Right? This player has acted irrationally ever since he left Cleveland. I mean, his forcing his way out of Cleveland, you could argue, was somewhat irrational. So it's actually a decent point that you make, and you know Kevin Durant and James Harden can play at a high level together because we've seen it before, although albeit a good while ago.
Let me give you this question here in the comments from this guy, Mark. He says, Thompson, Curry, and Durant didn't have a problem sharing the ball, winning a championship, and almost had two. What do you just say to that comment, the differences between that Warriors team and what the Nets are now?
The difference is the style of player and the quality of the defense. So Steph Curry, the greatest shooter that ever lived for my money, who, sort of a like he was their point guard, but he wasn't always their primary ball handler. Like he theoretically is what Kyrie Irving was supposed to be, just wildly more efficient as a shooter, right? Without the deficiencies on defense, or the turnover issues. Klay Thompson was such a great fit on that team because he never needed to touch the ball, right? Like the James Harden's game and Kevin Durant's game and Kyrie Irving's game are all predicated on having the ball in their hands. Klay Thompson scored 60 points in a game in which he dribbled like 15 times. That's again in an all NBA caliber defender, and that was prime Kevin Durant before he ruptured his Achilles. And you also consider that was a top 5 defensive team because there was buy-in there individually and collectively. And they were also very well coached by Steve Kerr, who had success with the nucleus before Kevin Durant got there. There are some similarities, and it is a fair point to make. But I have to see it on the court work for a good bit of time before I'm even going to come close to equating it to the greatest team of my lifetime.
All right, there you have it, everyone. Hembo is happy that the Philadelphia 76ers did not trade 2-5 for James Harden. Sigh of relief.
That's right.
Hold on, one more question. One more. Just because this Brooklyn scenario is like out of this world solely because of what's going on. But if you had to place your money right now, because they have Harden for what, 2 or 3 more years?
2 more years. Well, because he won't pick up that option. It'll be this year or next.
So 2 more years right now. Do you think they can win one? And if they don't,
no,
he won't go back to Brooklyn, I assume, right?
That is largely dependent upon what happens, I think, here in the next few weeks. So my guess is that what James Harden is going to want right now is some sort of massive extension. My guess is that what the Nets want right now is to see how this thing works. That would be, and that would be this year or next. The thing about James Harden is, as talented as he is, and this is the first ballot Hall of Fame player, obviously, legitimately one of the greatest scorers to ever live, is he's only 2 or 3 years away, in my opinion, from not even being a value positive player because of his style of play, right? Like, once Allen Iverson fell off the cliff, he was a net negative. The same goes for Gilbert Arenas. And obviously, James Harden is a better player than both of them. My point is, when you play a certain style, it requires you to have the ball in your hands a lot and play with ruthless efficiency, as he's done. But when you consider the body and the skill set and what he relies upon to be great, I don't see a player who's going to be great in 5 years. I just don't. And he's going to probably want that massive contract. That's, what is it, like between $40 and $50 million a year, which he can get right away. Like, that's what he's going to want, and he should, because he's a star. And you usually pay those guys as early as you can, as much as you can. But if I were the Nets and I had power over the situation, what I would do is try and hold on to this as a sort of a 2-year experiment and see what I can microwave rather than tying myself to James Harden for 4 or 5 years when I think those could be pretty ugly years. I mean, the comp I would make is like Albert Pujols was a first ballot Hall of Famer who just fell off once he lost some bat speed. James Harden, once he loses some bat speed, is going to be like a fairly large liability because you can't just run your offense through him, and he's not adding value otherwise. So we could be 4 years from that, we could be 2 years from that, but either way, that would be in the life of whatever next contract he would sign.
Right.